Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast with Ali Rafi. Lisa Gorman is one of the most accomplished legal executives in tech. She spent nearly 9 years at Eventbrite, rising from employment counsel to general counsel and CLO. She helped lead Eventbrite's legal strategy through its IPO, global expansion, the pandemic's devastation of the live event industry, and ultimately a $500 million acquisition. We speak about her path from law firm employment attorney to tech CLO, leaning into the unknown and taking on responsibility, and what the future holds for lawyers in an AI-driven world. We hope you enjoy the episode. All right, Lisa Gorman, welcome to the podcast. So great to have you on.
Thank you. So great to be here.
It was great seeing you at the GCAI conference with Julia Taylor a few weeks back. What did you think of the event?
I thought it was a fantastic event. I'm a huge fan of GCAI. And, we've been using it. We were using it on our team at Eventbrite for quite some time. And I was really happy to see everybody gather and talk about AI for a day. It was really fun.
It was a great event. Everyone there was just raving about the product. It was really cool to see.
Yeah.
Also, you just closed out a remarkable chapter at Eventbrite. So congratulations on that. I'm curious, before we get into things, what was your biggest highlight looking back on your time there?
For sure, the transaction itself, selling the company to Bending Spoons, was the highlight of my career.
Wow.
So I went out with a bang.
It was amazing. It was like within the last 6 months or so, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just left. This is my second week of unemployment. So I left on March 20th.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to get into your career. I feel like you followed sort of like, I guess, a traditional path of going to a big law firm and then transitioning in-house. So I want to take it back to when you were in school. You went to University of Michigan, studied English literature, and then went to Hastings, aka UCSF Law. So I'm curious, like when you were in law school in San Francisco, like what were you thinking you were going to practice?
I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was just having fun. I loved being a student. I loved Michigan, and I didn't want it to end. And so my motivation for going to law school was to continue being a student without wedding myself to a career. And so I did my diligence and learned that, with a law degree, you could do a wide variety of things. And so I was just looking for a degree that I could figure out what to do with later and live in the moment. And law school turned out to be really fun. I was really energized by not all of my classes, of course, but a lot of the classes were really fun and interesting. And it was an exciting time. I was living in San Francisco where I'd always wanted to live. And, and learning some really interesting things and meeting some really fascinating people. And so that's where I was in that moment. And then when the law firms came and sort of did their law firm days where they would, recruit us, that's the first time that I really started thinking about, where am I going after here and what do I want to practice?
Appreciate the candor. It just feels like nowadays, like with the recruiting cycles, it's like you have to know what you want to do as soon as you get into school. Have you been seeing this among law students?
Yeah, I think that's true. Even earlier than that, I think, even high school kids are starting to feel like they need to go into college with a major. That was not a thing for me, at least for me when I was growing up. It was like, you go to college and figure that out. And then you find your major once you're there and you've taken some classes and figured out what appeals to you. But I think earlier and earlier, people feel like they need to know exactly what path they're on.
Yeah, the recruiting timelines are so early these days.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I know you did a lot of employment work coming out of law school. And so you said you didn't have too much of an idea of what you wanted to do until recruiting started happening. So what was sort of that path? How did you end up there?
Yeah. So actually what I ended up, I did my summer. I had done a couple of summers. I did a summer as a judicial intern and another summer in law school at Farella, Braun and Martel, which is the firm I went to. And I still wasn't sure. But I knew I loved Farella. I felt really good about the people I met, and they had a wide variety of practice areas, and I was excited about the firm. So I knew I wanted to go there. But I did a clerkship after my first year after law school for Judge Laporte. And it was during the clerkship that I fell in love with employment law. And, you're working on all of the cases that come into the judge's chambers, and the employment cases were, I mean, for obvious reasons, the most scintillating and exciting and interesting. And I was like, I've got to practice this. So that once I got to Farella as a full-time employee post clerkship, I knew at that point that I really wanted to focus on employment law.
Gotcha. And for my fellow students, you said it was like an obvious thing that you really enjoyed. Like, what about it was so fascinating and interesting?
Yeah, it's the most people centric part of the law, right? It's about relationships and communication and I mean, I guess it was obvious to me maybe because I had waffled between being a literature major and being a psychology major, and so I had always sort of thought I might go on the psychology track. And so when I found employment law, it was like marrying the law and the psychology, and so it was just like a perfect fit for me. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah,
That makes sense. It sounds like you're like a huge people person. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think I am. Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
And you said you really enjoyed Farella, and so, but you went to Freeman. Like, how long were you working at Farella before Freeman?
I jumped around. I only worked at Farella for a couple of years and I did love it. It was a great fit for me from a cultural perspective. But once I figured out I wanted employment law, it wasn't a great fit. They have a small employment practice. There were two partners. And so it wasn't a big enough practice for me to be do 100% employment law, which was in some ways great because I got experience in all types of different laws. I'll never forget they handed me a hard hat and said, welcome to the construction team. We're going to work on a construction case. I mean, they really wanted to like give young lawyers the opportunity to work in on a variety of cases. But I figured out pretty early on, again, during my clerkship, that I wanted to focus on employment law. So while I got to work on some amazing employment cases, one in particular, this, Yahoo case when Yahoo was, a big deal. We got all the way to the steps of trial. It was a fascinating experience, but I wanted to do that all the time. And so I left Farella after a couple of years and went to a couple of small employment boutiques where I was 100% doing employment law. In each of them, I was doing about 50% employment counseling and 50% employment litigation. And I did that at a few boutiques and landed ultimately at Freeman Mathis and Gary, where I spent 8 years before Eventbrite became one of my clients. And so sort of organically made the transition over because, that relationship was just so strong. And I was doing so much work for them as outside counsel that I ultimately joined them as their first employment lawyer.
That's awesome. It sounds like a lot of folks go to in-house to their clients' companies, which is really interesting. I do have a question for you since we're on the topic. Like when you're thinking about recruiting at a firm, whether it's big law or not, and let's say they specialize in a certain thing, but they have a smaller practice. Like you said, one of your firms had a smaller employment practice. Like, how should law students consider going somewhere where maybe it's a new practice, maybe a big East Coast firm or setting up an ECVC practice on the West Coast versus going to a powerhouse? Like, how should students think about that?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really good question and kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, which is like, at what point should you, and do you know where you want to focus, and that happens at different times for different people based on their experiences. Again, the clerkship for me was that moment. It could have been earlier when I had been a summer associate at Farella. If I had worked on an employment law case, then I probably would have had that epiphany. But I didn't work on any employment law cases as a summer intern. I just didn't have the opportunity, and so I didn't realize it until the clerkship. So it kind of depends on when you have that moment. But I think, you want to, early in your career, you want to keep your options open, right? You want to the extent you can, make choices that enable you to, really dabble in all sorts of things so that you can figure out what the thing is that gets you the most excited. And so I think just the optionality is so important to really consider when you're a young lawyer.
Gotcha. That's great advice. If you don't mind, Lisa, can you talk about like how did that actually happen where a client is saying, we want you to come in, we really like the work you're doing? Like, what is that conversation actually like?
Yeah. For me, it was, I was at a startup that had been around for quite some time. They were about 11 years old at the time, so it wasn't a young startup. And they had a pretty built out legal team. I think I was the fourth lawyer, maybe fifth. But it does take time for startups to get employment counsel. So that was something that they hadn't had. But they had a pretty built out legal team, and I think they didn't know that they would need an in-house employment lawyer. They only had about maybe 1,200 employees at the time. That's a little bit on the early side for an employment lawyer, especially if you're not like, exponentially growing your employee population very, very quickly, and they weren't. And so a lot of companies will leave that to outside counsel at that time. So this was just a matter of luck, right? Because it just so happened that I came in as their outside employment counsel because they had one issue. Hey, we need an employment lawyer for this. And once I started peeling back the onion and coming in and going, I'm also seeing this and I'm seeing this. And what about, and I'm just, peeling it back. And they were like, oh God, can you help with that? Can you help with that? And so it was like one thing after another. And I was spending time in the office. It was down the street from my law firm. And I was coming over, and the days were getting longer at Eventbrite and shorter at my law firm. And I was finding myself having to like give away my other clients to my colleagues at the law firm. And eventually I was really at Eventbrite 5 days a week. I was just like sitting
Wow.
with the legal team 5 days a week. And we all sort of looked at each other, and the GC at the time was like, I think you probably should just join us. Like, it was pretty obvious that I had become, and this was about a year later, but I had really started, I was doing trainings and I had written the handbook and I'd done enough things that like I was kind of part of the company. I think with others that I know who have done it, it's been a little bit more like they really are truly outside counsel, but maybe they're their outside counsel for many years, and they just again develop the kind of relationship where when a role opens, it's like, well, we've got this person that we've just trusted for such a long time, and they give the role opportunity to that outside counsel first.
Yeah. It sounds like really organic and natural.
Yeah,
Like you understood the business, they saw that, you were always there, and it just worked out perfectly.
yeah, it was very lucky.
I love to hear it. And you said you were taking on more responsibility slowly. So you came in doing a lot of employment work, but you also did, sounds like some corporate restructuring and did some international work. Like, how did that, like, what were the responsibilities initially? And then how did you get more? What were the other responsibilities?
Yeah, it was an interesting progression. So first it was employment. And then pretty quickly it became litigation because, again, my practice had been 50% employment or counseling and 50% litigation. And it was all employment litigation, but it was litigation. And everybody else on the legal team at the time was a corporate sort of, we had a commercial attorney, a couple of corporate attorneys, and an attorney who did like product and privacy. We had nobody who had really done much litigation. And so I took on that responsibility almost right away. And I did that for quite some time, employment and litigation. And I became associate general counsel of employment and litigation. And then it wasn't until some changes had been made on the team. Our GC had left, and one of the corporate attorneys had stepped in. That was Julia Taylor, had stepped into the GC role. And there had been other changes on the team. And then it made sense. Julia was taking on some other things around the business in addition to legal. And it made sense for me to become more of a generalist and become her deputy. And so she made that change probably about 5 years ago. And I became her deputy general counsel and started leading the commercial legal team, product, privacy, regulatory,
Wow.
and of course, litigation and employment. But I hired someone into that role so that it wasn't my full-time job. And at that point, I was pretty much leading the legal team. I did not lead the corporate counsel who ran the board of directors. That Julia did that with her direct report and retained that. But the rest of the legal team, I was leading until
Wow.
Julia left about a year ago, and I became the general counsel.
That is so cool. I mean, it sounds like a steep learning curve. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and particularly interesting was that I was learning from the subject matter experts who had now become my direct reports. Right, I had worked with them as colleagues, and then I had taken over this deputy general counsel role, and now I was learning from the people that I was managing, and they were, teaching me while I was leading them. And it was a really, and I think, why it worked is because we had really strong relationships. We have a very low ego legal team at Eventbrite, which is important. And we were all gunning for the same thing, which was the success of the business. And so it was an incredible opportunity to learn from these brilliant attorneys who I had the pleasure of managing, but also learning from, and they being the subject matter experts.
Wow.
And then we also, during that same time, everybody on the team, other than me, I'm a little bit older, but the rest of them were all having kids and going on these 5-month parental leaves. And so giving all of us, not just me, but the other members of the team, the opportunity to step in and learn their roles hands-on while they were out on these parental leaves. And that was sort of happening around our whole team. So,
Wow.
yeah, really got comfortable and worked a lot on the commercial stuff, the product stuff, the privacy stuff, the regulatory, really got to expand and become subject matters experts in those fields as well.
Incredible, incredible. It sounds like, in some ways, like many stars aligned. There was a ton of growth at the company. There was opportunity for more responsibility. I feel like, I mean, I'm just assuming, like a lot of folks who are at law firms want to go in house at these hyper growth companies or startups. Like, how do you know? How do you even begin vetting out the companies to see like which one to join to get those kinds of opportunities?
Well, I think the way that you get those kinds of opportunities is to join earlier stage companies, right? Once you're working at like an established public company, I think the folks on the legal team are going to be more firmly rooted in their function. You're going to have an employment team of many, and the employment lawyers are going to work on the employment stuff, and that goes for each of the functions, and that's going to be more firmly rooted at a larger company. At a smaller company where you're, a startup and you're scrappy and you don't have a ton of resources and there's a lot of work, there's going to be much more opportunity at that size to take on different challenges and learn different areas.
Gotcha. But it's like, when 90% of startups fail, it's just it's so risky, right? Like, is there any like how do you know? Like,
Yeah, well, that's the big question. And look, I mean, Eventbrite was around for 20 years and is an incredible company, but we just sold it to a private equity firm. And so, uh, I think you're always going to take the risk when you go to a startup. You have to believe in it, right? Because, and again, a lot of your compensation is in equity, so you really want to believe in it because, you want to be invested in it psychologically and emotionally and financially in all the ways, and give it 100% of yourself. But you're right. And a lot of it's just going to be luck, which ones succeed and which ones fail.
gotcha. Awesome. I mean, let's talk some more about the responsibilities as you stayed with the company. You were working on some content. You rebuilt the content moderation program, which aligns with, I think, Safety Kit, which you're on the board of now.
Yeah.
And it launched Bright House. So, like, can you talk more about like how did the role evolve as time went on?
Yeah. And that's such a great point. Like the role really evolved, and this was a product of legal at Eventbrite playing a much bigger role than legal will play at a lot of companies. Our function has just always been like a large contributor to the strategy at the company. So we sort of stepped outside our lane a lot. But it was a long tenured team, and we had built a lot of trust with our CEO and with the leadership team in general. And so it gave us a lot of opportunity to sort of navigate in different areas. The content moderation role was a fascinating pivot for me. I had never done that work. I had worked with the team on, escalations and things that came to legal, but as the legal, person from that perspective. And then it was just happenstance that, we needed somebody to fill the leadership role on the policy side. And we didn't have anybody else there. And I raised my hand and said, I'm willing to do this. And it came at a time where we needed to, at the same time, become compliant with the DSA. The DSA had just come out and we were preparing for compliance. And we had a lot of opportunity to like sort of overhaul our back end when it came to content moderation. And so we found Safety Kit. I think they're a fantastic company. They've been such a great partner. And we, integrated it and started working closely with their team in shaping our policies and kind of creating a new way of handling content moderation at the company. And it's been extremely successful.
That's awesome to hear. And for folks who don't know, I mean, I don't know, like what are some of the nitty-gritty things that these types of platforms exist to prevent?
Yeah. So content moderation at Eventbrite is like, user generated content, which in our case is the event listing itself, right? Because we don't have individuals who can comment and it's on a social media platform. So there's not that type of user generated content. It is the event listing itself. And so the event listings have to comply with our community guidelines. And you can't have an event listing that is discriminatory or hateful, or violates other laws. Like, you can't have, X-rated, event listings, that kind of thing. And so we have community guidelines that are publicly facing to explain what is and is not permissible. And so what we work with Safety Kit on is how do you vet every single event listing to make sure that it complies with our community guidelines, and then communicate with either the event creator or the individual who is reporting the event for noncompliance. And what does that process look like? And it's important to do that, especially where the DSA is applicable in Europe, in a very specific and trackable and compliant way.
Interesting. I feel like this has been like a big topic of controversy in recent years. Like you see the headlines about like Meta's content moderation team and folks that are, I guess, being paid not a lot of money to see like really graphic things and vet that out. So yeah, would you say like this is like maybe one of your focuses or passions or something you really care about?
Absolutely. And it was such a great opportunity for me. Again, you wouldn't normally get the opportunity to lead that function as a lawyer. And that's one of the things that's made Eventbrite such a great journey for me, is that I had the opportunity to really dig in and learn it and lead it. And I care deeply about it, of course. Like what is up on, it's the integrity of our platform, right? It's about integrity and being a trusted marketplace. And so that was a huge concern for me.
And since we're on this topic, like just going down the rabbit hole a little bit, is this all just being monitored by AI now?
Um, at the first pass, a lot of it is, yes. I mean, again, individuals can report events. And so then that comes in for human review. And then escalations, AI will take the first pass, and then there's human review layered over that as well.
Gotcha. Awesome, awesome. So you ended at Eventbrite as general counsel and chief legal officer. It's just so cool to see like you went in focusing on employment and did so many things. So like I guess like what's your biggest reflection on all the growth at Eventbrite?
If you find a place where you feel like you can make a difference and it's a good fit, in terms of like the culture and the people, and you feel like your perspective is valuable and appreciated, then stay, because the opportunities when you stay at a company for a long period of time and you become a trusted partner are just, they can be endless. And I know that I have had enough jobs. Like we talked about this a little bit in the beginning of my career. I jumped around quite a bit. I left Farella and I went to several employment boutiques. They were fine. None of them were the right fit for me. Freeman Mathis ended up being a great fit for me, and I stayed a long time. And so I don't think people should stay in jobs where they're not happy or where it doesn't, there's not a good fit. But when you do find that, especially at a company, and you stay, you really can create a lot of opportunity for yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. It feels like in this day and age, loyalty is something that is considered overrated. And it sounds like there's still definitely something to be said about it, especially at a place that invests in you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think about that. Well, in the tech world, people just jump around year, 1 year here, 2 years there. And I just think there's so much to be gotten out of a job when you stay and you've seen issues and you're seeing things, especially on the legal front, you're seeing things from start to finish. I mean, there are things that take years, or something's coming back around and you've got the historical context from years prior. And there's just so much value to that I think for your own growth and development and for the benefit of the company, it's really helpful to stay, if you're happy, if it's a fit, and rather than chasing the next big job.
Who would have thought those things matter more than total comp?
Yeah. Well, for me, they matter more than total comp, but other people might feel differently about that.
Yeah. Awesome, awesome. What's I guess you're on some boards currently. If you don't mind me asking, are you thinking? Do you know what's next for you?
I don't know. I am actively searching for my next opportunity. Like I said, I like to stay, so I want to find some place that I can call home for a while.
I love it. I love it. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the two board positions you're on as well.
Yeah, I'm on the advisory board of Safety Kit, which we talked about as the trust and safety vendor. Really great team. Gotten to work very closely with them on the content moderation stuff at Eventbrite. And then also on the National Independent Venue Association, NEVA, which is near and dear to my heart, and an organization that really stepped up in COVID for the live events industry and led by Stephen Parker, who's a fantastic human and is just doing great things for the independent venues.
Awesome. Sounds like you're heavily involved with things you're super passionate about. We can end on a sort of a different note. Obviously, you've been at a leadership role at one of the biggest at Eventbrite. So I want to talk about legal tech and what you're seeing in the scene right now. We talked briefly about GCAI. So, like, what's your take on where technology is right now with legal AI, and where do you think it will be in a year?
Um, I mean, from my perspective, it's hard for me to imagine going to another company and joining a legal team and not having a legal AI tool. In addition to non-legal AI tools, like either Enterprise Chat GPT or Claude or any of those. I think you just need a variety of AI tools at your disposal, and a legal AI tool has to be one of those. So, in terms of which one, I think I haven't used Harvey. I've used GCAI. I think it's fantastic. I would use it again for sure. I know there are others coming up. I know some of them are more law firm front, like more used more by law firms than by in-house lawyers. And I think, obviously with all things AI, it's always going to be right now, it's a race to, who's going to be the number one provider in each area.
Do you think, like, we're hearing all these crazy stats, right? Like it's going to eliminate X amount of lawyers, or 75% of the time it took to review a contract within the next year. Like, what do you think of these bold claims?
Yeah, I mean, I do think about mostly I think about how will junior attorneys at law firms get the experience that they need to become, strategic, seasoned lawyers, if AI is doing a lot of that more junior attorney work for us, right? Think about that. And how do we get junior lawyers the training and allow AI to be a force multiplier for them rather than just for the more senior attorney? And I think we need to figure that out. I mean, obviously, that's a very important thing that we have to continue to train. And it doesn't just go for lawyers, it goes for all people coming out of college and graduate school. Like, how are we giving junior people the training, and not letting AI replace them, because then what?
Yeah.
uh, and so I think that's a really important question that we have to answer.
Totally. It's tough when you're, coming into a role as an entry level position, and you have to know how to do the role first so you can correct or check the AI. So I completely agree with you. And it's as a student, it's in your face all the time. So yeah. Lisa, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I do want to just ask, like, is there any advice you'd give to law students in this day and age before we end the podcast?
Well, enjoy. I think law school's so much fun. So try to have fun with it. Um, and keep an open mind. I think it's like you don't know what's going to grab you. And there are so many things you can do with a law degree, so many things. And again, it doesn't even have to be practicing law, right? And so I just say keep an open mind and wait until that thing grabs you that makes you really passionate about a career. It's a long career if we're lucky. And I know a lot of lawyers who burnt out early because they didn't hold on to the right thing and they were just in it and it was a grind and it felt hard. Wait until the thing doesn't feel hard, until it feels really fun. Because I am here, I graduated law school in 2002 and I pinch myself every day that I get to do the work that I get to do. And
Wow.
that's what you want. You want a long career with staying power that's going to keep you interested and excited. So hold out until you find that, because it's out there. It's a broad enough field that everybody can find that somewhere.
Great advice. I feel like a lot of people needed to hear that. Really appreciate it, Lisa. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ellie.